Hey everybody, Nick Espinosa, your chief security fanatic here, and today we actually have to talk about Russian intelligence because their cyber attacks were stopped before they started, but we're not out of the woods yet. This is interesting. Here's what's going on. It's actually not the first time. We'll talk about that, but this is coming from the New York Times. Now, here's what's up. The United States said this past Wednesday, a few days ago, that it had secretly removed malware from computer networks around the world in the last few weeks, and this was a step to preempt Russian cyber attacks and send a message to President Putin, and here we are. Now, this move was made public by Attorney General Merrick Garland, and this comes basically as U.S. officials warned that Russia could try to strike American critical infrastructure, including financial firms, pipelines, aka Colonial, and the electrical grid in response, obviously, to these massive sanctions that the United States and the world have been leveling against Russia. This is something I've been talking about as well. I've even done videos on, basically how to prepare for a Russian cyber attack, as well as given speeches. I was literally just in New York the other day giving that exact speech. Now, here's what's going on. The malware enabled by Russians to create botnets. If you don't know what a botnet is, it's basically a network of private computers that are infected with malicious software, and essentially these were controlled by the GRU, which is the intelligence arm of the Russian military. Now, it's unclear what the malware was intending to do, since it could be used for anything from surveillance to obviously destructive attacks. And American officials said also on Wednesday that the United States did not want to wait to find out, and quite frankly, I agree with that. Now, here's the nuts and bolts of it, and this is why we have to discuss this, I think, at length, because armed with secret court orders in the United States and basically the help of governments around the world, the Justice Department and the FBI disconnected the networks from the GRU's own controllers. Now, these court orders, though, allowed the FBI to go into domestic corporate networks, meaning private corporations, and remove the malware, sometimes without the company's knowledge. Now, this operation was revealed on Wednesday, and it basically showed a willingness to disarm the main intelligence unit of the Russian military from basically inside the United States and also around the world. But it's also the latest effort by the Biden administration to frustrate Russian actions by making them public before Moscow can essentially strike. Now, even as the United States works to prevent Russian attacks, some American officials fear that Vladimir Putin may be biding his time in launching a major cyber operation that could essentially attack the economy. I've talked about that at length. It's not like Russia's going to launch a land invasion of the United States. That would be utterly insane, in the same way that they're not going to start lobbing missiles, across the Arctic, hitting us, because we'll hit them right back, and basically that's nuclear holocaust. Now, until now, I should say, American officials, according to them, the primary Russian cyber actions have been directed at Ukraine. I've talked about that as well, including things like wiper malware that's designed essentially to cripple Ukrainian government offices, financial institutions in Ukraine, other things as well, and also an attack on the European satellite system known as Viasat. I've talked about that as well. Now, the details of that satellite attack, which is basically rather unique, are of particular concern to the Department of Defense and intelligence agencies around the globe, which fear that it may have exposed vulnerabilities in critical communication systems that the Russians or others could exploit in the future. Now, the Biden administration has also instructed critical infrastructure companies in the United States to prepare to fend off Russian cyber attacks. Also, intelligence officials in the United Kingdom are echoing those warnings for their private corporations as well. And while Russian hackers have sometimes preferred to quietly infiltrate networks and gather information, researchers say that the recent malware activity in Ukraine demonstrates the increasing willingness to cause digital damage. That's something I've also talked about as well. They're not going to go in, recon, and hold you for ransom. They're going to destroy as much as they can and move on, because they're looking to damage the economy, or at least the local economy, depending on who they're hitting. Now, security experts also suspect that Russia may be responsible for other cyber attacks that have occurred since the war began, including disruptions and attacks on Ukrainian communication services. Obviously, those are ongoing, but I'm in that camp. It basically looks like Russia or Russian cutouts. But the core thing here is One, we've got a two-sided coin in the sense that right now we are possibly on the verge of World War III. I literally just wrote an article entitled World War III Started Years Ago online, so depending on what you believe, we've been in World War III for about a decade now or more, thanks to cyber warfare operations, but we are sitting here in a hot war, a kinetic war. Bombs are dropping, guns are being fired, tanks are rolling in, and by virtue of that, cyber warfare becomes an essential aspect of that. The Russians essentially are going to be gearing up and planning for that because, quite frankly, we have to prepare for this because that's really their only recourse as we continue to tank their economy, as the globe continues to level sanctions, with the exception of China and India against, those are the two large notable exceptions. There are others, but those are the big ones against Russia. We have to take heed for this. But the other side of the coin here is, once again, essentially the United States intelligence services and federal law enforcement are essentially, without notifying private corporations, going into the corporations to remove malware. We saw this exact same thing on the wake of the SolarWinds issue, where that obviously was a Russian intelligence basically operation as well. That was confirmed when FireEye caught that, broke that, and exposed that. Here we are, because that hit major government agencies, Fortune 100 level corporations all the way on down. And so what we saw were a slew again of secret warrants by things like the FISA court that allowed the FBI to go in and essentially start wiping these things out, meaning the vulnerability was open in, let's say, that Microsoft Exchange server. They went in and started actually closing the vulnerabilities, especially when there was a massive Microsoft Exchange one. Again, this is all coming off the wake of the SolarWinds attack, because we saw after that Colonial Pipeline and then massive vulnerabilities in Microsoft, all those kinds of things. And so the government in that way has been proactive, but that also flies in the face of privacy. Now, obviously, nobody wants to see a successful Russian cyber attack, whether it's taking over and ransoming, whether it's wiping things out, whether it's bringing a private corporation to its knees or a government agency. But at the same token, we have to respect the privacy. I would much rather see the FBI notify that private corporation's IT or cybersecurity team saying, you have to fix this now, we will help you if you want. But them just going in and secretly doing this, that I think is potentially grounds for a lawsuit essentially on the rights to privacy that individuals and corporations have, especially if they're not in the public sphere or owned by the government. And here in the United States, we have a vastly huge private corporation infrastructure. Obviously, we want to keep that safe. Obviously, we want everybody to be vigilant. There are going to be corporations that are going to maintain good vigilance. There are going to be plenty that are not. Oftentimes, those are the ones that call us when the world is burning down around them. But this is a very important thing. While we are actively defending ourselves against Russian cyber attacks, this is not the first time that we have seen secret warrants leveled by U.S. law enforcement, basically allowing them to exploit the vulnerabilities that, let's say, a foreign attacker would to get into the system, basically to fix it. And while we may be applauding that, we are also looking at essentially what is tantamount to a government intrusion. And while it may be, let's say, to that corporation's benefit, if the corporation isn't informed, that's a problem. And so I think this actually really warrants debate, but, here we are. So I'm curious to know what your thoughts on this are, because I think this is one's going to be debated for quite some time. But as it stands, we've hindered essentially the ability for Russian intelligence to launch cyber attacks. But I can guarantee you right now, they have many cards up their sleeve. They are not hindered, completely or thoroughly. It's not like they're going to slink away when this is their only recourse. We should be preparing for these cyber attacks. And while we might have slowed them down or closed off an avenue that they had, I guarantee you they've got others. They will use them, they will exploit them, and we have to be ready. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP, and please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please stay private. Thanks, everyone.